Most people think shadow work is about healing. It's not. It's about ending self-deception. Shadow work begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I become better?" and start asking, "What am I still refusing to see?" Carl Jung never described the shadow as darkness. He described it as everything you were forced to abandon in order to be accepted: your anger, your power, your selfishness, your desire, your need to be seen, your instinct to say no. The shadow is not evil. It is unlived life. And until it is faced, it does not disappear. It controls you, silently, relentlessly, from below awareness. Most people believe they are conscious. Jung would disagree. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That sentence alone explains most suffering. You think your reactions are personality. They are not. You think your triggers are caused by others. They are not. You think your patterns are bad luck. They are not. They are shadow behavior. Shadow work does not begin with journaling. It begins with radical honesty. The kind that makes your ego uncomfortable. The kind that dismantles the image you worked your whole life to protect. Here is the truth few people are ready to hear. If you are overly kind, your shadow is cruelty. If you are overly calm, your shadow is rage. If you are overly spiritual, your shadow is superiority. If you are overly independent, your shadow is need. The shadow always compensates. Whatever you suppress consciously returns unconsciously as behavior, projection, or sabotage. That is Jung's law of psychic balance. And it is unforgiving. Most people don't avoid shadow work because it's hard. They avoid it because it threatens their identity. Because shadow work asks a terrifying question. What if the version of me I'm proud of is incomplete? The ego hates this question. The ego survives on consistency. The shadow represents contradiction, and contradiction feels like death to a fragile self-image. This is why people spiritualize instead of integrate. They meditate to avoid anger. They forgive to avoid boundaries. They let go to avoid confrontation. They call it growth. Jung called it repression, and repression does not create peace. It creates pressure, pressure that eventually explodes through anxiety, depression, addiction, relationship chaos, or physical illness. Shadow work is not about becoming nicer. It's about becoming whole. Wholeness includes what is ugly, what is inconvenient, what doesn't fit the persona. The persona is the mask you learn to wear to survive. The shadow is what you sacrificed to keep that mask intact. And here is the cruel irony. The more moral you believe you are, the darker your shadow becomes. Jung warned about this constantly. People who identify as good often contain enormous unexpressed aggression. People who identify as selfless often contain enormous resentment. People who identify as peaceful often suppress a hunger for control. The shadow does not disappear because you deny it. It grows stronger because energy that is not expressed is stored, and stored energy seeks release. If not consciously, then compulsively. This is why people self-sabotage right when things are going well. This is why success feels uncomfortable. This is why intimacy feels threatening. Because success and intimacy expose the shadow. They remove excuses. They strip away distraction. And suddenly you are left with yourself. Shadow work is the act of turning toward what you avoid. Not to act it out, but to own it. Ownership is the key. Jung did not ask people to indulge the shadow. He asked them to integrate it. Integration means this: I can see my capacity for darkness without letting it control me. I can acknowledge my hunger for power without becoming abusive. I can accept my selfish impulses without letting them dominate. The moment you say, "I would never do that," you guarantee the shadow stays unconscious. Because denial creates blindness, and blindness creates danger. The most dangerous people on earth are not those who know they are capable of harm. They are those who believe they are incapable of it. Shadow work strips away innocence and replaces it with responsibility. You stop saying, "That's not me." you start saying, that is also me. And strangely, this does not make you worse. It makes you calmer, more grounded, less reactive, because what is seen no longer needs to act out. Jung said the shadow becomes hostile only when ignored. When acknowledged, it becomes a source of vitality, power, creativity, truth. This is why artists, leaders, and visionaries often have strong shadows. They are not afraid to look inward. They do not confuse morality with repression. They understand that light does not come from pretending darkness isn't there. It comes from holding both. Shadow work means you stop trying to be pure and start trying to be real. It means you stop asking, how do I get rid of this part of me? And start asking, what does this part of me need? Because every shadow trait was formed for a reason. To protect you, to adapt, to survive. Your rage once kept you safe. Your detachment once prevented heartbreak. Your control once stopped chaos. But survival strategies become prisons when they go unquestioned. Shadow work is not about blaming your past. It's about updating your identity. You are no longer the child who needed these defenses. But unless you integrate them, they will continue to run your life, as if you still are. This is why shadow work feels destabilizing. It removes automatic reactions. It dissolves false certainty. It forces you into awareness. And awareness is uncomfortable before it is liberating. Most people want peace without confrontation. Jung said this is impossible. There is no peace without truth, and no truth without shadow. If you feel resistant right now, that's a sign you're close. The shadow always resists being seen, not because it is evil, but because exposure feels like annihilation to the ego. Yet on the other side of that fear is something rare, inner authority, the kind that doesn't seek validation, the kind that doesn't over-explain, the kind that doesn't collapse under criticism. Shadow-integrated people are not perfect. They are solid. They don't pretend to be light. They contain it. And that is where real power begins. The shadow is not born. It is constructed, slowly, quietly, through adaptation. No child arrives fragmented. Fragmentation happens when love becomes conditional, when approval is earned, when safety depends on behavior, when expression is punished. This is where the shadow begins. Every time you were told, don't be like that, a part of you went underground. Every time anger was met with rejection, anger became dangerous. Every time sadness was dismissed, sadness became weakness. Every time confidence was shamed, power became threat. So the psyche did something brilliant. It adapted. It split. One part learned how to be acceptable. The other learned how to survive in silence. Jung called this split the persona and the shadow. The persona is who you learned to be, to belong. The shadow is who you had to stop being, to stay loved. This is not pathology. This is intelligence. But intelligence used for survival becomes limitation in adulthood because the shadow does not disappear. When the thread is gone, it stays frozen in time, operating with outdated rules. You may no longer be the child who needed approval, but your nervous system still believes. Love is conditional, so the shadow waits. It waits for moments of stress, moments of intimacy, moments of power, and then it leaks out, not as awareness, but as reaction. You snap at someone and don't know why. You sabotage closeness right when it feels real. You overgive until resentment poisons connection. You shrink when visibility approaches. That is the shadow acting autonomously. Jung warned about this. He said what is not integrated becomes fate, meaning you don't choose it. It chooses you. This is why people repeat the same relationships with different faces. Same dynamic, same pain, same ending. They think they're unlucky. They're not. They're unconscious. The shadow is not random. It is patterned, and patterns exist to be decoded. Here's the key most people miss. The shadow often contains your strongest qualities, not just your flaws, your assertiveness, your sensuality, your ambition, your authority, your creativity, traits that were inconvenient for your environment, traits that threatened others' comfort. So you learn to soften them, hide them, mute them. But power doesn't disappear just because it's suppressed. It turns inward, becoming anxiety, becoming self-doubt, becoming depression, becoming chronic fatigue. This is why so many kind people are exhausted. They are carrying power they never learned how to use. Shadow work is not about digging for trauma. It's about restoring access to what was exiled. Jung believed the psyche moves toward wholeness, whether you cooperate or not. If you cooperate, it feels like growth. If you resist, it feels like suffering. That's the difference. Most people resist because the shadow challenges identity. It says, you are not who you think you are. That destabilizes the ego. But here's the paradox. The ego is not your enemy. It just hates being dethroned. The ego wants to stay consistent. The shadow wants to be acknowledged. Shadow work is the negotiation between them. You don't destroy the ego. You mature it. You show it truth. And truth always costs something. Usually illusions. This is why shadow work feels lonely. Because you outgrow familiar roles. You stop being predictable. You stop being easily categorized. People may say, you've changed. They're right. What they mean is, you're no longer playing the role I'm comfortable with. Shadow integration shifts your energy. You become less reactive, less defensive, less eager to explain yourself. Not because you don't care, but because you no longer outsource your worth. Jung said that neurosis is the price we pay for avoiding legitimate suffering. Shadow work is that suffering, the conscious kind, the kind that leads somewhere. Avoiding it only delays it, and it always collects interest. Here's another truth people avoid. You don't integrate the shadow by liking it. You integrate it by recognizing it without judgment. Judgment strengthens repression. Curiosity dissolves it. Instead of saying, I shouldn't feel this way, you ask, why do I feel this way? Instead of, this is wrong, you ask, what is this protecting? The shadow responds to respect, not indulgence, not suppression, respect. When you acknowledge it, it stops screaming. When you listen, it stops sabotaging. This is why shadow work changes behavior without forcing discipline. Discipline without integration is brittle. Integration creates effortless regulation. You don't have to control yourself when you understand yourself. That's Jungian psychology at its core. You are not broken. You are divided. And division creates conflict. Wholeness creates peace. But wholeness requires courage. Because to become whole, you must reclaim what you disowned. And that means facing parts of yourself that don't match the story you tell about who you are. Shadow work is the death of self-flattery and the birth of self-respect. In the next movement of this video, we'll go even deeper, not into theory, but into how the shadow shows up in daily life, in relationships, in success, in anger, in self-sabotage. That's where everything becomes clear. The shadow does not announce itself. It does not say, I am your unconscious. It disguises itself as personality, as preference, as instinct, as intuition. That's why it's powerful. Most people think they are making choices. Jung would say they are repeating patterns. The shadow operates automatically. It reacts faster than conscious thought. It hijacks moments when awareness is low. Stress, fatigue, intimacy, authority, rejection. These are shadow gateways. And nowhere is this more visible than in relationships. You don't fall in love with people. You fall into projections. You are drawn to people who carry parts of your shadow you have not integrated. Their confidence triggers you because you suppressed yours. Their emotional distance wounds you because you disowned your need. Their chaos excites you because you repressed spontaneity. Jung called this shadow attraction. It feels magnetic, faded, intense. But intensity is not intimacy. It's recognition. Your unconscious saying, there is something here I haven't reclaimed yet. This is why relationships feel addictive. Not because of love, but because of unfinished integration. You are trying to retrieve lost parts of yourself through another person, and no one can hold that burden forever. Eventually, the projection collapses. They disappoint you. They fail to save you. They fail to complete you. And you call it heartbreak. Jung would call it the withdrawal of projection. That pain is not loss. It's awareness. The moment you realize they were never meant to carry your shadow for you. But most people don't integrate here. They repeat. New face. Same dynamic. Different story. Same wound. This is shadow compulsion. And it's exhausting. The shadow also controls your relationship with success. If you associate success with danger, visibility with punishment, or power with abandonment, you will sabotage yourself right before breakthrough. Miss deadlines, create chaos, lose focus, self-destruct, not because you're lazy, but because your shadow believes success equals threat. Many people learned early that standing out meant being criticized, that being seen meant being attacked. So the shadow learned stay small equals stay safe. Later in life, you consciously want more, but unconsciously, you are protecting yourself. So you hesitate, you delay, you overthink. Jung said the shadow often wears the mask of fear, but fear is not the root. Fear is the guard dog. The shadow is the vault. Inside that vault is a belief formed long ago. And until that belief is seen, discipline will never work. You cannot outwill what you haven't understood. The shadow also governs anger. Not explosive anger. That's obvious. But suppressed anger. The kind that leaks as sarcasm, passive aggression, emotional withdrawal, chronic irritation. People who say, I'm not an angry person, are often full of unexpressed rage because anger was forbidden. So it went underground. Jung warned that suppressed anger does not disappear. It becomes poison. It poisons the body, the mind, the relationships. This is why some people are constantly tired. Fatigue is often anger turned inward. Depression is often aggression without direction. Shadow work teaches you that anger is not the enemy. Unconscious anger is. Anger, when owned, becomes clarity, boundary, energy. But when denied, it becomes destruction, either toward others or toward the self. This is why shadow-integrated people are calm but firm. They don't explode. They don't submit. They respond. Responsibility replaces reaction. That's integration. The shadow also controls your self-image. You think low self-esteem means lack of confidence. Often, it's the opposite. Low self-esteem can hide a disowned sense of superiority, a belief that I should be more, I deserve more. But expressing that felt dangerous, so it was suppressed and turned into shame. Jung said shame often guards the shadow's gold. What you hate most about yourself often hides your unrealized potential. This is why shadow work feels paradoxical. You confront darkness and find strength. You face shame and discover confidence. You acknowledge selfishness and learn self-respect. The shadow is not only pain. It is unused energy, untapped authority, buried instinct. Another place the shadow dominates is morality. People use morality to avoid integration. They say, I would never do that. That sentence is a trap. Because the moment you deny capacity, you lose choice. Jung believed ethics without self-knowledge is fragile. True morality comes from awareness, not repression. A person who knows their capacity for harm and chooses restraint is far safer than someone who believes they are incapable of it. This is why Jung distrusted moral perfection. He saw it as shadow inflation. Light without darkness is fantasy, and fantasy breeds monsters. History proves this. Individuals who believed they were morally superior caused unimaginable harm because their shadow was projected outward. This evil is not in me. It must be out there. So they attacked it. Shadow work ends projection. You stop demonizing others. You stop idealizing yourself. You meet reality. And reality is grounding. Shadow work also reveals why you over-explain yourself, why you seek validation, why criticism destabilizes you. These are signs of a shadow that learned. Approval equals safety. So disagreement feels like threat. Rejection feels like annihilation. Shadow integration builds internal authority. You no longer need agreement to exist. You no longer collapse under judgment. You listen. You evaluate. You decide. That's maturity. Jung called this the development of the self, not the ego. The self is larger. It contains contradictions. It holds opposites, confidence and doubt, strength and vulnerability, light and shadow. The self does not need to perform. It simply is. Most people never reach this stage. They remain trapped in persona maintenance, curating an image, protecting a story, defending an identity. Shadow work dismantles that prison. Slowly, painfully, liberatingly. You stop pretending. You stop proving. You stop hiding. And what emerges is not chaos. It's coherence. You feel solid, not inflated, not superior, grounded. This is why shadow work changes presence. People feel you differently. You don't demand attention. You command it, silently, because you are not split. There is no inner war, no energy leakage, no repression draining vitality. Your energy becomes clean. Jung said integrated individuals radiate authority without dominance. They don't chase power. Power flows through them because they are not afraid of themselves. This is the ultimate outcome of shadow work. Not healing, not positivity, but integration. And integration changes everything. How you love, how you work, how you speak, how you stand. You are no longer fragmented. And fragmentation is the root of suffering. In the final section, we will move into real shadow work. Not theory, not philosophy, but how integration actually happens. What it looks like daily, why most people fail, and how to begin without spiritual bypassing. Shadow work does not begin with rituals. It does not begin with affirmations. It does not begin with positivity. It begins with honesty, brutal honesty, the kind that doesn't ask to be liked. Jung warned that most people use spirituality to avoid the shadow. They meditate. Instead of confronting resentment, they manifest. Instead of acknowledging fear, they forgive. Instead of setting boundaries, this is not shadow work. This is bypass. And bypass creates deeper shadows. Real shadow work is not mystical. It is psychological. It is relational. It is daily. And it starts with one skill. Most people never develop self-observation without judgment. The moment you judge yourself, the shadow hides. The moment you justify yourself, the shadow disguises itself. But when you observe, without defending or attacking, the shadow reveals itself. Jung believed the unconscious speaks through reactions. So the first real practice is tracking your reactions, not your thoughts. Your reactions. What angers you instantly? What embarrasses you deeply? What makes you feel superior? What makes you feel small? These are shadow signals. Every emotional spike is a doorway. Instead of asking, why are they like this? Ask, what part of me is being touched right now? This single question changes everything. You stop externalizing. You stop blaming. You stop running. And you begin integrating. Shadow work is not about fixing. It's about owning. Owning your jealousy without acting it out. Owning your anger without becoming violent. Owning your selfishness without becoming cruel. Owning your need for control without becoming rigid. Ownership dissolves compulsion. What you own no longer owns you. This is why repression fails. What you repress controls you. What you face transforms you. Jung said the shadow becomes dangerous only when it remains unconscious. Awareness removes danger, not perfection. Awareness. Another core practice is reclaiming projections. Every time you idealize someone, every time you demonize someone, ask yourself, what quality am I seeing that I have not integrated? If you envy confidence, it's because your own confidence has been suppressed. If you despise arrogance, it may be because you fear your own power. If you resent dependency, it may be because you were never allowed to need. Projection is the psyche's way of showing you what you have abandoned. Take it back, slowly, responsibly. Shadow work is not permission to act out impulses. It is permission to understand them. There is a difference. Integration is containment with awareness, not expression without consequence. This is where maturity develops. Another essential component is confronting your narrative, the stories you repeat about yourself. I'm just not that kind of person. I've always been this way. That's just how I am. These sentences are cages. They protect the ego from evolution. Jung believed identity must remain flexible. Anything rigid is unconscious. Shadow work loosens identity. You allow contradiction. You allow complexity. You allow yourself to change. This can feel destabilizing because certainty feels safe. But certainty is often a defense. The integrated person can hold uncertainty without collapsing. That's strength. Shadow work also requires grief, grieving the self you never became, the childhood you didn't have, the needs that were unmet, the anger you swallowed. Most people avoid grief, so the shadow holds it. But grief is not weakness. It is release. When you allow grief to move through the body, the shadow softens, and something surprising happens. Energy returns. Vitality returns. Creativity returns. Because energy was locked in suppression. Jung said neurosis is often a sign of unlived life. Shadow work frees that life, not all at once, but piece by piece. This is why the process cannot be rushed. Integration happens in layers, cycles, spirals. You revisit themes at deeper levels, each time with more awareness, more compassion, more choice. And slowly, you stop reacting. You start responding. You stop proving. You start being. You stop seeking validation. You develop self-trust. This is the fruit of shadow work, not enlightenment. Authority, inner authority. You no longer need permission to exist. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You no longer explain yourself compulsively. You no longer betray yourself for belonging. You belong to yourself. Jung believed this was the highest achievement of a human life. Not happiness, not success, but wholeness. A person who has faced their shadow is not perfect. They are real. And real people change rooms. They don't dominate. They don't perform. They don't chase. They are grounded. And grounding is magnetic. If you feel unsettled right now, that's a good sign. Shadow work is not comforting. It's clarifying. And clarity can feel uncomfortable before it feels liberating. But here is the truth. You are not broken. You are unfinished. And what feels dark inside you is not corruption. It is unintegrated life, waiting. If this work speaks to you, if something in you recognizes what's being said, then this channel is for you. Because inner Phoria is not about motivation. It's about transformation. Not about feeling better, but becoming whole. If you're ready to stop running from yourself, subscribe, stay, do the work. And remember, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But the moment you turn inward, with courage, fate becomes choice, and choice becomes freedom.